All right, so what's going on, world history students? I want to just get on here and talk to you a little bit about what we're studying this week. And I know you guys have a lot of work that I gave you, or I don't think it's a ton of work. I think it's definitely more than last week. We're trying to gear up so slowly, but we're starting out with history right now, and what we're talking about is just the beginning of history. So we started the Paleolithic age, and so the Old Stone Age, the rise of humankind up until about 12,000 BC, before Christ. Or now, what you'll see in a lot of textbooks is they'll have this moniker instead of BC, before Christ, and they'll have BCE, which is before Common Era. I'm still old school BCAD, right? Around 12,000 BC, and is the rise, we'll have the rise of humankind, and this is before prehistory, and prehistory deals with just the inability of writing. There was no idea to put history down, so we don't know a lot about this period, because there was no tools being made, there was basically no writing being made during this time. So it's called prehistory. We know a little bit about this history from the very early on things that they did make, but it wasn't very advanced stuff. And it was until later we started getting more into where we can finally kind of guess what the humans were doing and what they were like when writing came along. So if you guys have some scientist background on this, you know that humans have come through different various forms of development. So the Homo sapiens came about 10,000 BC, and they had larger brains and able to tools came around during this time, and also weapons. And then you had the Homo sapiens sapiens. These were felt like they were around Africa, around that crescent, fertile crescent there with those various rivers like the Tigris and the Nile, and that's kind of where this civilization started joined together, and people started gathering around these river civilizations, which is what you guys are studying this week as well. Language gene, that the Homo sapiens sapiens had this language gene supposedly during that time. Then, as we go on through human development and change, you started having social organization, equality between hunters and gatherers, slow population growth, better tool use, migration to new climates. Fire was a huge development during this time. Animal skins in order to protect against the weather, the elements of the weather, and this gave rise to what's called the Neolithic Age, which is the new Stone Age. And the New Stone Age brought the invention of agriculture, and means the lower yield for hunting. People were able to have community and stay in one place instead of migrating, going from hunter gatherers to more staying close to a specific place and cultivating the land. And as far as agriculture goes, you also had animals being domesticated at this time. You had dogs, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. The Neolithic Revolution gave rise to just different agricultural developments. Alongside this, is still some ongoing hunting and gathering. Um, there was obviously resistance that came up between different civilizations and different resources. So um, people you started seeing people having conflict, battles with each other. Tribes became villages, irrigation, and then defense because of those battles started to be developed. And you had an organization of labor that was developed, which means that you had your worker bees, you had these supervisors, kind of similar to like any place you work. There's an organization of labor. When you work at Chick-fil-A or whatever, to keep things organized, keep things going correctly. So that's what that organization of labor means. So in southern Turkey, Around 700 BC, the also became a large complex in this place called Katohuyuk, and you had agriculture. Then you had started having some trade, and we also see some shrines there at that place too. So agriculture and change started to develop into what these ages gave birth to these different periods of time, like ages like the Bronze period. The Bronze period is a time where metal replaced stone tools. Agricultural became more significant. Metalworking became as more of a specialized trade. Woodworking became more elaborate. You had craft manufacturing, and you also had the invention, this huge invention, right? The wheel. The wheel and fire, those are two huge things in human history. So the wheel came about 4000 BC, and there was additional advancements in commerce. When we talk about commerce, it's money, and then also war again. So you want to, as things started developing and you started having resources, developing land and crop and different tools and stuff like that, and you started having women and children, you want to be able to protect what you have. So out of the abundance of that, people needed to start look at war and war strategies in order to protect all those resources there. Then you had nomadic societies, and nomad just means a person that doesn't stay at one place. They move from place to place. They are roaming herders, and they're usually fringes of civilization in all different areas. So you had the Indo-Europeans in the 1500 BC who were nomadic, and then you also had the Huns. These are Central Asian, located in Central Asia, from around 4th century BC. So these nomadic society and culture was a seasonal travel. So they had to, they were always traveling, so they had to deal with harsh environments. Their animals were horses to move around and to use that as transportation. They were perceived as violent people, perceived as cruel, and usually the band of these nomadic people were usually around 30 to maybe 15 people. They had a lot of strong men as their leaders, and patriarch cultural system, which in world history you'll hear a lot of the men were the leaders, and don't feel bad. Women was just the way, that's history. Was more or less a patriarch system where men were the leaders and women were homemakers, right? That's just history. So we'll be saying that a lot. It's just because a lot of civilizations were marked in that way. Of course, now in modern history, a lot of that stuff has changed. Now, I know this is a sidetrack, but now I saw statistics that about 30% of men are stay at home now. So they're the homemakers, and the wife is out there working. So that's a big change from now comparably to most of all of history. So moving on. So nomads and civilizations, they invaded different people when they would go from place to place. And so this had some change in population structure, and they also traded between different societies, and as they moved from place to place, they started connecting. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that is so rude. Started connecting people from different cultures, right? Because they were moving around, and a lot of people weren't. So the things that they had and trade with, well, these were unique things, and started making the world a little smaller for everybody. All right, so let's go to the idea of civilization and as far as a world historical perspective. So there's fundamental differences. There's what you'll hear a lot of terms in world history as civilized versus savage or inferior, and what makes one uncivilized according to a lot of history books that you'll read, especially older ones. They'll look at the ones that are uncivilized. What makes a person uncivilized are those who, because history was written a lot by Greek Western history historians. Western history. What I mean by Western history, a lot of people will equate that to Greek society. The classics, Socrates and Aristotle, has a lot of influence in this Hellenistic culture, is what is referred to, and how people learned what they learned, and that society decided, if you weren't Greek, then you were what's called barbaric, especially if you didn't speak Greek. So speaking Greek can be kind of equated to speaking English, right? Um, if you didn't speak Greek and if you weren't Greek, then you were considered barbaric. If you had different cultural attributes, like if your dress was different from the Greek society, Western civilization, you'd be considered savage. Or if you had different manners than the Greek society, that would be savage as well. And a shift between that thinking didn't really change, not until the 18th, 19th centuries is when that started to change that view of thinking. And so let me give you an example of what I mean. So, for instance, like Native Americans, when Europeans came over here, they were considered as savages. They were considered as inferior to the Europeans, and for a lot of various reasons. And I mean, even when you think of Indian, because of the way we grew up, a lot of us, especially myself, I think some things are changing, but when they taught me about Indians, it was always sort of that stereotypical with the feathers and stuff like that, and barely wearing clothes, or just running around almost naked, right? Well, that doesn't really fit historical context. For instance, the Aztecs we'll learn about the Aztecs and the Mayans were extremely civilized. They had a very intricate culture and civilization. Where Mexico City is, it was the capital of the Aztecs. Tino, I can't say it right now, but anyways, when Cortez saw this, Cortez the Spaniard, that came over and saw this city, he marked how beautiful it was and how intrinsic it was, and how it was built. The infrastructure of the city was great. It was extremely huge buildings, huge things that they created. Their civilization was very, very sophisticated. The Aztecs and also the Mayans, and they just lived differently than they did. So, meaning that they weren't Christian, right? They didn't know anything about Christianity, so they worshipped a different god. And their worship was different from theirs. They did do human sacrifice, which is very foreign to the Spanish, but if you put yourself in their shoes, probably what the Spanish did seemed very foreign and uncivilized to them if you were to put yourself in an Aztec's shoes. But all that to go and say is that just because different civilizations had different dress and different language and different manners, certainly did not mean they were uncivilized. They were just different, right? And it's important to point that out as far as world history perspective, as when you read history, you just kind of like have to remember that, and not in order to pigeon yourself into a place to where you were thinking of other people as uncivilized or savage, without looking from their perspective. Because having a true gauge of history is you really want to know like where other people's perspectives were at the time, and how did other people other than myself think about certain situations, putting yourself in their shoes. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them or the decisions they make. It just means that you should seek to understand their side, even though you still may think that their side is definitely wrong. But it goes a long way to look at different views and different viewpoints and try to understand. And I think that's really important. I try to do that whenever it comes to anything in my life, especially history. So whenever we talk about definitely things that everybody would say are evil and people have done evil things, for instance, like the Nazis, everybody would say, "Oh man, these people are evil people," and I would definitely agree, right? Hitler's a bad person, but I find it fascinating in order to try to figure out and look into history. Why did they do what they did? Get into the mind, into their mind and their shoes. Like, why did they choose to do the things they did? Like, what was their motives? Because obviously they didn't think of themselves as the bad guy, right? They thought they were the good guys. They thought they were doing good. They thought the other guys were the bad guys. They thought we were evil, evil Americans, and our way of life was evil. I mean, we we definitely think what they did and how they thought, but the things they did were definitely evil. Um, but I think it's fascinating in order to seek to understand what were the reasons behind, what were their motives, how did they get to their thinking, and what that shows us, if we can learn that, is it can prevent maybe these things from happening in the future. Maybe we can talk other people out of going that way, showing them a different way, because we know the consequences of certain lines of thinking or certain lines of action that can lead down a dark road. So history has a big role to play as far as shaping society and shaping our current modern life. I mean, a lot of things that are going on right now have went on in the past. We talk about COVID. This isn't the first time that we have went through a pandemic. We went through the pandemic 1918, Spanish flu. How did society react then? And it's very interesting because if you look back, a lot of people were wearing masks. There was a lot of huge campaigns for wearing masks at that time. And so they had to deal with the government intrusions and things like that as well, just like we're facing. So we can look back and find out, hey, how did they decide these things? Why did they decide these things? What makes where we're at different? Should we make different decisions? How should we make these decisions? So history can be used in a wide variety of ways in order to do those sorts of things. So anyways, I think I talked already too much, so I'm going to go ahead and sign out. So hopefully things are going well with you, and Mr. V, and see you later.